the founder and CEO at Wheel Innovations. At Wheel Innovations, our mission is to help enterprise customers to solve what everybody is now talking about, called BYOD, the 4 letters. Bring your own device. And how many of you have heard BYOD, the term before? And how many of you have actually done a project, an active project on BYOD? So what we cover in today's session is to look at the trends, why BYOD is such an important thing, and what are the challenges that is forcing the customers to actually look at in BYOD, and what are the different types of solutions. There is no one kind of a solution that actually solves this in BYOD. We look at all the different approaches that different customers in the different verticals are leaning towards or trying to deploy. And then we as entrepreneurs, and I don't think the problem is solved. This is a long journey for this vision to be fully realized. I also want to delve upon the future of the mobile computing, the devices, and so on and so forth. And the goal there is to collectively present about the opportunities that we can go solve, whether it's at Wheel Innovations or the companies that you want to solve, and so on and so forth. And one thing that I want to make it very clear, this is not my company presentation. This is an industry or a technology presentation where we want to talk about the mobility trends and what is the consumerization, what is BYOD trend, and what is happening. I also included some of the customers that we work with, and I don't I include the exact customer names, but the themes of the customers, why they are interested in solving the consumerization, or even why mobile computing. And I want to talk about some of those scenarios, and then I actually take an introspective look about why Apple and Google, of all that investment, why this is becoming a big burning problem. On one side, Android and Apple say that they built the most secure platforms ever. But somehow, they're falling short in terms of meeting the needs of customers and also the end users. So we kind of look at the reasons on why that is the case. And to mitigate that limitation, what are people trying to do? Whether it's the startups or big companies, and what are the different approaches that customers are using right now or exploring. And then I also kind of present a futuristic view. Only if Apple had done something like this. Only if Android had done something like that. Or only if other startups have done some of the stuff. And then again, these are strictly my views. And in the end, I conclude with some of the opportunities that we have for entrepreneurs. And I also want to open it for discussion so that we can brainstorm and discuss about the opportunities. About myself, as I said, I'm the founder and CEO of Wheel Innovations. The company was started in July 2011, based in Austin, Texas. My background, in fact, BYOD, I've been solving the BYOD problem since 2002. In 2002, we started a company called Neoteris, an SSL VPN company, where we allowed people to use their personal PCs to securely access corporate resources. The D in those days meant desktop or the computer. And that company was acquired by Juniper for about $400 million. And prior to that, I worked at a company called Blue Coat. Now, all of you know it as Blue Coat, a security company. But back in those days, when I joined, it was known as Cashflow. Not the CACH, but cash in the technology cash. Cashflow. And I also wasted about 5 years between Microsoft and Bell Labs. I don't want to delve too much into it. After the startups of Neoteris, I worked at a company called FaceTime. Now the company name FaceTime was actually sold to Apple. For all those FaceTime lovers, the name was actually given by my previous company, and that company is now known as Actians. And I've done a bunch of virtualization startups in the end user computing, and some of you may know VDI, about Virtual Bridges, Mocha 5, and RingQ. And I also joined a VC firm in Austin called Austin Ventures, one of the largest VC firms, as an entrepreneur in residence. I've been very passionate about end user computing, and I'm very excited about the transition from PCs to now the mobile world. And we're very excited to make our vision a reality. But it would be very unfair for me to say that it's all my stuff. I'm just the face. I'm actually backed by some of my co-founders who are really the brain behind what we are doing. We're also very fortunate to have gotten the validation from the likes of GigaOM. Recently they said we are one of the top 10 hot startups. So that's about me. Now, let's look at what's happening in the end user computing. The first macro level trend is that desktop is dead. Okay, I'm still using a desktop, but we are fundamentally moving from what I call as a desktop to device transition. And the reason for that is people are driven to the mobility and the touch and the gestures and the convenience. And it's not just about the device user experience. The thing that we actually ignore is the simplicity of the App Store. Before the App Store, every user had to worry about, get a zip file or a MSI file, manually install, manually patch, and all the kind of our patch management and so on and so forth. What did App Store do? Nobody does any installs. Nobody deals with backup or any other stuff. App Store simply delivered a better user experience, both for the consumers of the end user computing, but also the publishers, people who want to distribute their apps. They don't have to worry about how to distribute it. They simply submit it to an App Store, everything happens. So we are now in this, what I call as the device plus apps era. So this, the other interesting thing is, starting from 2010, the rate of new apps, until the iPad became hugely popular, Microsoft had about 90% of the all app ecosystem. And starting 2010, the rate of new apps being written for Windows has gone down to about 10%. And most of the new apps are actually being written for mobile and or web-based apps. The SaaS apps could be HTML5 and so on and so forth. Then a year later, something substantial has happened. The mobile had captured the user's imagination and enthusiasm so much. Now, Forbes recently came up with an article, and they basically said web is dead. There is no Web 3.0. It's all about mobile apps. For example, when I first wake up, if I want to read my email, what do? I go launch an app on my device. Or if I want to read news somewhere, I go launch my CNN app. So for anything, if I want to book my ticket, I go launch United app. So every vendor, every website owner, they now realize that by delivering a mobile app, they can actually engage with their end users much better, and the users are also liking more targeted user experience. And my prediction, and in fact it's not just my prediction, but lots of other people are saying that, that going forward, now we may have about 1 billion websites. We are going to enter into the world where there are 1 billion apps. So we'll talk about in some of the opportunities, what that means. And Forbes also was gutsy enough to say that the traditional Web 2.0 based companies like the Facebooks and the Googles, until they get their mobile story right, about 5 years from now, we may not even be talking about them. We might be talking about new Facebooks and new Googles. So that's, again, I don't take credit for that, and I agree with that. And the third macro trend that I see is, today, the ecosystem of app stores are primarily dominated by public app stores. Apple Store, Google, Play Market, and Amazon, and so on and so forth. But in the future, the trend is that every company is going to control their own store. So these are the three trends. One is desktop to device plus app stores. Number two, Web 3.0, we are entering the mobile world. And the third one is we're going to see more of private app stores. And about the app stores, this is a quick slide. Gartner just published a big market on the size of the app store economy. They predict this is going to be about $60 billion in about 2 years. And apparently it's already at $5 billion in the overall ecosystem. But they also call out some of the challenges. Is that setting up your own app store, it's not easy. And earning the trust and the security and the billing issues, all those infrastructural issues need to be addressed before we could fully realize this market opportunity. Any questions so far? So now let's actually look at this is all happening on the end user side. Now let's actually look at what are enterprises doing. If you look at an enterprise, I always thought about that they were in a box. They have their own perimeter. Whatever they did, it stayed within the box. So what that means is they had their own hardware in terms of the data center. This is what used to be their traditional practice. They used to have their own devices, whether it's PCs, IT used to buy all that stuff. And sometimes they also built their own apps or bought their own apps, but it stayed within the box. And guess what? Gartner just made their 2012 IT predictions, and they basically said the two C's, cloud computing and consumerization, or the two of the top 4 initiatives. What that means is, instead of staying within the box, IT is now being forced to move your data center away out of the box and tap into the cloud resources. And then the second thing is, in terms of your end users, instead of owning the devices and building your own apps, then IT is being again pushed outside of the box to go adopt or embrace the user's own personal devices or the apps that are publicly available. That's what consumerization is all about, which is don't stay within the box, but go what the user really likes on the consumer side and allow them to use their own devices, allow them to use their apps for the business use. And why is that important? In fact, studies have been shown that by allowing people to bring their own device, you can significantly save the cost in terms of this cost, and also you could also improve the productivity. Now users don't have to carry multiple devices. And if there is an app that they already like, by allowing them to use it, you automatically save significant productivity. So there are tremendous benefits. In 2005, when I started a company called FaceTime, in those days, we actually coined the word consumerization along with Cisco. And the IT in those days was all about, I don't like consumerization, I want to stay in my box. If anybody wants to use Skype or any of the applications or bring their stuff, I'm trying to invest in all the security solutions like the firewalls and so on and so forth. I want to stop it. And the first reality was, they could not stop it. The stricter controls that they were trying to put, the applications became smarter, the devices became smarter, and in fact, we built a company of Neoteris, which is to beat all the firewalls and so on and so forth. So IT was, on one hand, they were trying to put stricter controls. On the other hand, they were buying infrastructure to beat the controls. Then the wisdom dawned on everybody, which is that this is a losing battle. Instead of trying to control, allow, and block, let me actually embrace it. And then suddenly, all the business benefits actually showed up. So now, IT wants to embrace the user-owned mobile devices. This could be an iPad or Android and so on and so forth. So before we look at it, let's understand the security profile. Are they secure enough for an enterprise usage? So let's first look at Apple. So the way the Apple ecosystem works is Apple has this very popular app store, and then you have the device. It could be an iPhone or an iPad device. It's actually one of the most progressive security platforms that were ever built. And I know there is a lawsuit between Google and Apple, and Steve Jobs in those days used to complain a lot that Google guys actually cheated and stole the framework. In many ways, Google architecture is very similar to the Apple iOS platform. So on the App Store, there are many security controls. One is every app that you publish, it has its own DRM technology. What that means is, if you try to reverse engineer or any other stuff, nothing is going to work. It's something that iTunes actually uses. And the second thing is every application is actually signed with Apple's own distribution profile. It's like a code signing certificate. That means you can again it guarantees the integrity of the application. And the third one is not that everybody can use any app. There are stricter authentication, authorization, auditing controls. Only signed in Apple users with Apple ID, whether it's a publisher or an end user, only they get entitled to the apps, and every publisher or the developer has full control about who's using what and all the billing stuff. So there's a rich AAA ecosystem. And not only that, Apple has gone even further. Every app that you publish, they actually do detailed security testing. And we kind of experience that. They do the testing and they basically look at what API calls are you using, why are you using, and they have some techniques. If you try to use a framework into your code, they basically reject it. So they have stricter controls, so that way they can also guarantee to maintain a cleaner ecosystem of the apps. That's what they're doing. And then on the device, they came up with this sandbox architecture. For those of you who are very familiar with Linux POSIX type file formations, strictly speaking, every app writes its data into its own directory. In the Linux world, its own sandbox, and other applications cannot get access into it, except for some areas. Like for example, the /inbox of folder in your sandbox can be used by other apps to access it. And the reason for that is, like for example, you have a mail app and you have a helper app, let's say like a Word. When you want to open an attachment, you want the Word to be able to use it. So the sandbox has some public sharing capability so that apps can collaborate it, but it's highly, highly restricted. The reason why they did it is by creating separate sandbox for every app, you automatically guarantee the security. And not only that, they even allow very limited inter-process communication. And in fact, if you publish an app that requires some apps to communicate using sockets and so on and so forth, you need to do detailed explanation. And it does not even work, because the moment you shut down the app, Apple automatically puts it to the background or shuts it down and so on and so forth. There are some ways to work around that, but you need some authority to do that. The other significant improvement that they have done on the device is that they've added encryption. It's a native hardware encryption. In spite of the sandbox, every data that app writes on the disk is fully encrypted, and it's hardware encryption. And that encryption is actually tied to your passcode. So everything seems really good. In a pure consumer world, where we are talking about one user carrying one unique device, and all the apps that the user has control for, this is a perfect solution. For a consumer, this is great. I own my passcode. Apple guarantees with DRM encryption and everything. It's a fully secure platform. There are the limitations. Now, when we look at an enterprise, what does an enterprise want? And this is a slide that I did in 2005, and the world has not changed much. In the case of an enterprise, what the IT wants is, number one, they want to have controls. And the reason for the control is they want to have corporate governance. Every type of institution have some controls about who are my employees, what their roles, and what they can do, what applications, how to protect my intellectual property, and so on and so forth. Typically, it goes through a cycle. The first one is visibility. IT wants to know what everybody is doing. Employees want to know what apps are you using, how are you using your apps, what data you're accessing. So that's the first thing. And without the visibility, you cannot control. You cannot control what you don't know. So it all starts with visibility. And the second one is they want to put some hygiene into the ecosystem. So by doing authentication and control. Like for example, if you want to use an Office app, first you need to authenticate against my Active Directory, and I want to know who you are, what groups you belong, and I want to make sure that you only have access to those applications. Then as part of the hygiene, you want to make sure that it's a clean ecosystem. You don't get any bad stuff. And we also want to control. Now the Apple has lots of capabilities, whether you can use location, and whether you can use in-app purchases and so on and so forth. These are all referred to as gestures. So they want to have policy-based gestures controls. That's all part of the policy. And the third one, probably the most important thing, is the data protection. The data protection is that any app, let's say if I'm using a Salesforce app, and if it's actually putting together my marketing campaign on the device, I want to make sure that it's fully encrypted. That's called data at rest. It means the data sitting on the device. Or the data in transit. If I'm sending that Excel spreadsheet somewhere, I want to make sure that that's secure in the transit. So that's the data encryption. And what we basically just realized before is, in the case of an Apple iOS device, the moment user unlocks the device, whether it's my Salesforce app or Angry Birds, everything becomes unencrypted at the same time. They're all equal citizens. Suddenly, IT lost control. So their stricter requirements for the Salesforce app is no longer there. So the last thing is, many of the regulated industries like the financial and healthcare and so on and so forth, every action that you enforce, how did I protect my data, how did I enforce my control, they all need to be logged and reported and archived and so on and so forth, so that you're ready for all the different regulations. So no matter what security solutions that you're talking about, I think it goes through this 4-stage life cycle. Now let's get back into the same context. So what does that mean? From a conceptually, what does an enterprise want? So they have an app store. Let's say the company called let's say XYZ. They want to have their own app store instead of distributing the apps from Apple, because I'm close to my businesses. So I want to host my own app store server, and because of the iOS requirements and so on and so forth, I want to distribute my apps with my own provisioning profile, with my code signing certificate. And the third thing is, I want it to tie into my own AAA system, my own Active Directory or my own certificate authentication or two-factor ID or whatever that I'm using for my company. That's what I want to do from my backend. Now on the device, for my corporate app that I want to deliver on the user's device, I want to protect that sandbox with more features. Number one, I want to create it as an isolated container. I don't want this sandbox to touch or in any form or shape with other apps. It's in isolation. The second thing is, anybody that wants to launch that app within that my own protected sandbox, I want to make sure that it actually authenticates against my own Active Directory. So suddenly, I'm creating a separation. Not all apps are equal. The corporate apps, I'm treating them specially. I'm inserting an authentication. And even when I'm trying to do an encryption, instead of relying on the native hardware-based encryption that's equal citizens for all the apps, now I'm actually putting a private key, separate key, to encrypt the data that this app is writing. It's a private encryption, along with a revocation. If for some reason the employee leaves the company or the device was stolen, as a corporation, I want to have full control over it. I want to be able to wipe it clean. Because these are all the changes that are happening in every enterprise. And then last but not least, I want to control every action. If the app is trying to make a socket call and sending an Excel spreadsheet, I want to be able to encrypt that entire session. I also want to control that this particular app only could connect to my own SAP system, but don't make connections to anybody else. You can have stricter control. So this is what conceptually what customers want. I want to put a wrapper around this, the sandbox that I already provide with my own security controls. Is this a new problem? No, this problem has been solved since 2002, but we've been solving it for PCs. Now the same problem has to be solved for every platform that comes along the way. I hope there is a standard, and which we'll talk about in the future as we go along. So let's actually talk about some of the customer examples, just to give you a feel for what we are talking about. So here is a large government agency. And this government agency, just one division of a big government, there are about 80,000 people. And they are now spending about $1.1 billion annually in just trying to manage their devices, apps, and so on and so forth, the traditional box that we talked about. And they actually consume applications from about 45 different vendors. Everybody ranging from Microsoft to Salesforce to everybody. And recession does two good things. One is it actually cleans all the excess out. So with the recession, now the CIO got a dictum to reduce that $1.1 billion to about $600 million. So in the $600 million, they did a lot of analysis. The first thing that they said is by moving from PC to mobile devices, they're actually saving from about $2,500 per user on PC to about $1,100 to $1,200. And then the next step is, most of the employees already have their own iPads. By bringing them the stuff, they can actually reduce that cost even by additional $500, significant savings. But that's only one aspect of it. The significant chunk of $1.1 billion actually comes from how they distribute these apps. And App Store actually has shown the way. The CIO actually said, Why can't it be like an Apple for my own organization? Why can't I, set my own store and let the developers or the ISPs where I consume my applications, have them publish their applications into my app store, and then all my IT has to do is set up the policies and all the security controls, then everybody is happy. It's the same experience for the end user, whether they go to the app store or whether they go to your corporate store. It's the same experience. And then they call it as G-store, it's a government store. And then they came up with a conceptual idea, and then they started looking for solutions. Who can actually make this happen? So this is one example. And the second thing is, some of the global financial companies, when you're talking about the financial companies, the first thing that they care about is the security. And for them, right now, mobile is probably one of the most strategic initiatives. You go and talk to them, everybody walks in with iPad. And we are talking about all the mobile platforms, at least in the enterprise space, it's 95+% is all Apple. Android, because of the fragmentation problem that they have, there are about, I think, 500 to 600 certified different devices, and people cannot, IT cannot just deal with that fragmented problem. Then that's a separate issue that we'll talk about. So what they're doing right now is they adopted the mobile, and they basically started buying, iPads for every employee. And the first goal is like, how do I manage my own iPads? But the goal that they want to do is, I don't want to own my own device. I want to allow them to bring their own devices, and I want to deliver the security. And the security for these financial companies is so strict, particularly companies that have branches in Germany and so on and so forth. Germany is actually a lot more stricter in privacy compared to US. Here we are a little bit more lenient. So as an IT person, as a company, they don't have a right to know what the user does in their private space. They could be watching gambling, they can be doing all this stuff. In fact, you should not even touch what the user is doing. It's the stricter BYOD requirements that they have. And the second thing is, I have a typo there, global financial companies, and the other thing. There's another use case is the school districts. I now live in Austin, Texas. In the school districts where my kids go to, starting this year, every middle school and high school student is getting an iPad. They're going with a completely paperless initiative. So every student is doing all their learning from middle school onwards on an iPad. And the issue that they have is now, how do I secure it? Now I gave iPad for everybody. They could be going to Angry Birds, they could be doing all that stuff. Now the first focus is that, how do I create them a secure workspace for the students? Then all the other school districts started complaining, which is about, hey, you are privileged, you have resources, you gave iPads. But what about the other schools? And if only the solution was about, most of the kids already have iPad or some kind of device. Just bring them their own device, and we can enable this online education or the iPad-based education. So again, they're looking into a BYOD-based initiative. And healthcare is probably one of the earliest adopters of what I call as the BYOD. Kaiser Permanente in 2006, they actually gave every doctor $2,000 in 2006. Basically said, buy whatever the machine that you want, and I'm going to deliver my secure environment. And every doctor went and bought Macs in those days. Now, Macs gave way to iPads. So again, there is a stricter need. And again, in the healthcare, with all the HIPAA and so on and so forth, there is a greater need for security. And along with this enterprise stuff, now there are all the telcos and service providers. They want to be the store providers for every organization. If I'm a SMB, even though I like to have my own store, I don't probably have the resources. But I can go to AT&T, say like, Mr. AT&T, why don't you run the store for myself? So that's another big trend that's happened. Any questions so far? I think. So let's actually look at what are customers doing to solve the BYOD problem. So I've actually broken this into 3 stages. The first generation of the solutions, or what I call as MDM, mobile device management. So this is about companies wanting to take advantage of the mobility. The first thing that they did was they bought iPads. It's the company-owned devices. They gave everybody their own device. Then the problem is not about how to create the security stuff. they told the rules. You can only do the work-based stuff, nothing else. On the work-based stuff, the companies that went and solved this problem, Mobile Iron, Zenfries, AirWatch, and now there are open source MDM solutions that are out there. And but this is now considered legacy. So the real problem of the BYOD problem that they're trying to solve is the generation 2 is allowing employees to use their own devices. There, I say there are about 3 distinct or prominent approaches. The first BYOD or the sandboxing solutions came from companies that actually provided security SDKs. So let's say if you have a Salesforce like app, you can actually take the Salesforce app and then Good or somebody gave a security SDK that provided the wrapper, and then you recompile that application and then you deployed it from your own store, then all things are good. And obviously SDK based stuff means the biggest drawback of these solutions is it required a developer to intervene into the process. Then the second category of companies are what they call as the app wrapping companies. So app wrapping companies are a little bit more intelligent. In other words, you don't really require a developer or any of the stuff. You take an app and you upload to the App Store. App Store does some magic where it automatically adds the security sandboxing as we talked about, and then you specify the policies and everything starts working. So here, there's some very innovative companies. One company called New Corner, which was recently acquired by Symantec. And there is another very startup company called WrapSphere, which I don't think they even gotten any customers other than they were doing 2 or 3 betas, and they were acquired by AppSense. And I think Mokona has been doing a bunch of stuff, but now they're focused on this stuff, and now my company also does the same thing. So this is a very innovative approach. The challenge here is there are shades of gray. The companies, how far their technology is in terms of securing different types of applications. Their own apps versus App Store apps versus the native apps like mobile Safari and mobile email. And the last one is hypervisor stuff. This is, I think, is primarily vendor-driven stuff. If you talk to VMware, they can only think of hypervisor, nothing else. So they think everything based on an operating system based centric. Now I fundamentally believe that we are living in a world where it's all about apps and data. Operating system is actually meaningless. And by doing an hypervisor based centric, you're trying to bring the whole operating system. And there was a point in time where I believed hypervisor based stuff, but based on some of the practical experience about the tax on the battery and the user experience and some of the performance and so on and so forth, I think these solutions are yet to prove themselves, and I don't know if they will ever be. But the fact that they're backed by companies like VMware, they will definitely have their own place. And the third one, the stuff that I'm very passionate about. We all like the BYOD concept, but is it really BYOD? As an end user, I should have the freedom to choose the device that's built on whatever the platform that I want. I want to be able to use an iPad or Android. And just by choosing a device platform, why should I be restricted to the apps that are built on only that platform? The real BYOD is to enable the user to bring whatever the device that they want, but I should be able to consume whatever the app, regardless of the platform that is built on. Apps are like services. But there is a danger here. The moment you say this, everybody thinks that that means HTML5 and so on and so forth. It's not HTML5. You still want to get all the benefits of the mobile app experience, offline, running locally at the device, and so on and so forth. So this, I think, is going to be the future 2 years from now, where the users get the true independence of the freedom computing to carry their own device and subscribe to an app that's built on whether it's Windows 8 or iOS or Android or whatever the platform that comes in. I carry one device, and I can use whatever the applications. So this is where there's a lot of work that's happening, with emulation, simulation, and some combination of virtualization and so on and so forth. A very good innovative company in this approach is a company called BlueStacks. They actually allow you to run Android apps on your existing Windows PC. So there is a free beta product that's available. So anybody, in fact, I run Android apps on my laptop. So this is the first category of innovation. So we are also doing some innovations in that space. So again, the 3 stages. The first one is company-owned devices. That's MDM. That's legacy. Companies are doing great. but now it's about the BYOD. There's SDK, wrapping, and the hypervisor. But I think most customers, at least the conversation that I have, they want to have an automatic solution where the app wrapping comes into place. And then the third one is about the real future, where where we truly give the freedom to the end user. So this is a quick overview of our solution, where it's a 4-stage process. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, in the third generation of the solution here, we've been having different kinds of desktop technology for the last 30, 40, 50 years. Linux, mainframe, Windows, Mac, and so on. But we never solved a problem in this way. So we never had any an application that would run a software that is written on Linux on Windows. Probably the first time it was ever attempted was when people started writing web applications, HTML5.
Yeah.
How do you think this is any different?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that they were not really there. Like for example, the good Wine and Windows emulation on Linux and so on and so forth. It's just that it always matches with do you have the right business models? It's not about do we have the right smart people or not? Do we have the right backend? In those days, Microsoft was so powerful that anybody was trying to make Wine successful, and they had all the developers going, so it didn't really make that much of an investment. So and then that's when the web came in. But I think web was successful to some extent. I think even now, I think from a technology standpoint, yes, there are so many hard problems to solve, but there are the interesting thing to answer your problem on the Windows stuff. Then people said, once the virtualization became a universal standard, then everybody said, why should I have a PC, to access Windows? Then people started doing, virtual hosted desktops, running the, Windows desktops in the data center so that I could use a Mac or Linux and so on and so forth. So there are different approaches that have yielded different ranges of success. It's just that we are still stuck in, the Windows, kind of centric stuff. Very few people are now trying to see how can I solve the problem for the emerging mobile platforms. And I am very sure that people are going to be putting so much focus, like the BlueStacks and what we are doing. There are some challenges, technical challenges that we need to do. But when I go and talk to customers, assuming that there is a technology that's out there, everybody wants to go there because it is truly the BYOD vision that everybody is after. Right? Just the Android stuff, 600 devices, certified devices, just solving the Android problem. That if I build an Android app, there is no guarantee that it works across all the 600 devices. Just figure out some kind of a magic where you can guarantee that it runs on every Android device, and better yet, on every PC, and better yet, every Mac and iPad. It actually is a very powerful stuff. And I think it's going to happen. There is a debate about that, isn't HTML5 that? So I think HTML5 could also get there, but the HTML5 had to solve other problems. And when I see that Web 3.0 is not dead, people are about native apps that are running, it gives me some level of confidence.
So
I hope I answered the question. Thank you.
I have a question here regarding the Android devices. Ice cream sandwich is supposed to solve the problem with different flavors of OS running, but adoption rates, as everybody knows, if ice cream sandwich is pathetic.
Yeah. It's actually, there is a bigger thing. I think both Microsoft and Google have adopted this partner-centric ecosystem where they're building the platform and then they're relying on the device, guys to do all that stuff.
Yeah, another thing, I think we can discount Windows. Windows has 1.3% market share.
Yeah, not that I've wasted some time in my life at Microsoft, but I really want Microsoft to succeed. And the reason for that is, now with the Apple, we entered from one monopoly of Microsoft. Now we entered into another monopoly. That's the Apple. If the world becomes all of Apple-centric, then I don't think as users we will have some instant gratifications right now. But I think in the long run that will not be good. And as we are seeing, enterprises are suffering in trying to make iPads work in the enterprise. I always believe that heterogeneity of the different mobile platforms is always good for the industry, and it creates more opportunities.
I think personally, I think enterprises suffer because of lethargy. They're not quick. They're not agile.
No, it's not that. Actually, every enterprise, they have corporate governance requirements. Unlike in a consumer, they have to, first of all, they need to document record of every user what they use, and they have stricter controls over their data. As an end user, I may not have as much control. So that comes in, and then the IT has been lethargic. They were staying within the box, but now they're trying to stay outside the box. And we're trying to make that happen. So this is a quick stuff, but again, as I said, the full security lifecycle. We built a unified secure app store solutions where enterprise IT can publish any of their apps, and then they apply their policy, and they have an option to deploy their applications locally on their device or deploy in a mode where any app can run on any device, the future generation of the BYOD, and everything is documented so that you are ready for governance. So, taking a step back, what could have Google and Apple done differently? What could have they done to extend the security so that it meets the needs of both consumers and the enterprises? The one thing is, for example, on their sandbox, if only they added an extra layer of protection, whether the sandbox could register with a service like VeriSign and tell me that who is my owner for the app. Instead of App Store being the single point of owner, if they were to go with somebody, it's like, hey, tell me who my owner is. Tell me what my encryption key is. I want to have my own encryption stuff. Tell me what my security profile should be. If only they had most of the platform. If only they put that wrapping kind of an API in the platform, then this could have been an Uber platform. Uber platform where it meets the needs of both consumers and the businesses, and it creates a very thriving ecosystem. And is it technically hard to do? I bet it's probably 3 months worth of work for them to design this entire stuff. But why they are not doing it? A biggest chunk of Apple's revenue comes from App Store. When they publish the applications from there, they get 30% of cut. When they suddenly get this API, where everybody is putting their own registration services and so on and so forth, they're out of the equation. Their business model does not work. And Apple, I don't think, last time I checked, is a non-profit. And in fact, it's probably a max profit organization. So, sorry.
But that's where there was the motivation for the jailbreaking, right? But
yeah,
it comes with its own risk.
Yeah, the jailbreaking, the corporate, the BYOD that we are talking about anywhere in the presentation, we have not talked about jailbreaking. This is about creating a security environment without actually going out of the way, right? That's the need. So that's the reason why we did not talk about the jailbreaking. Right? Yeah, that was the impetus for that. But now there are more solutions, the innovative solutions that came in that actually meets the needs without actually going the extreme step. So this, I think, is something, and I've had a big debate with, Android, security CTO about, why they didn't actually go this far. And obviously, we all know the answer. But I do not be surprised if there is something like this happen 2 years from now. Particularly with the stiff competition that's coming between Microsoft and, all the other players. So let's wrap up with what I see as the opportunities for all of us, the entrepreneurs. Number one, mobile is the center of the universe for end user computing. I don't disagree with that. The second one is, as I said earlier, let's imagine a world where every website, in fact, to some extent, I believe that firing up a browser and typing a URL, I find that very antique. In fact, launching your device, go to the app, and then engaging with the service for the app, I think is the very intuitive model. And there are actually, believe it or not, there are a bunch of new startups that are being funded to deal with the situation where now you're talking about billions of apps instead of billions of websites, and now you need to worry about SEO and SEM in that app ecosystem. There are very intelligent startups there. And the third thing is the mobile platforms and the app platforms, I believe they will be heterogeneous. When today, the Apple's domination in this space, I try to discount that as a long and costly aberration. Not that I don't like an Apple product. We have probably about 10 devices at home, all Apple devices. But I think I would want Microsoft and Google and other players to build good devices, good apps, more smarter apps, so that this becomes a very very exciting ecosystem. And the last part, not the least is every business and also the consumer will have their own app store to match with their business context or the security context. And it's all about users, consumerization. Whether it means, whether you're acting in a personal context or a business context, it's always about honoring and taking care of the user's interest. Giving the users the choice of the device that they want, giving the users the choice of app or the platform that they want, and giving the choice of the user to go get that app from the store that they want, with different billing options, different stuff. And that's the real BYOD, and we as entrepreneurs, we can actually make this happen. Thank you. Any questions, comments?
So today, if you build an app, you can either put it in the app store, or if you have an enterprise account and you say that it's for an enterprise, then you can distribute it to your known users within your enterprise. Technically, you can always send that link to anybody else. People can even download it, but if Apple catches you,
yeah, there is some gray area. The first and foremost thing is there is a using an ad hoc provisioning profile, you need to specify up to 500 device IDs and so on and so forth. But once you have the enterprise provisioning profile, that gives you an ability to distribute on any device. But they basically tell that those devices must be owned by users that are affiliated with the business. Exactly. So that's a gray area that you cannot quite enforce. But the solutions that we are doing, the reason why financial customers want a solution like this is they want to be ready when Apple comes and says, show me the audit of your licensing requirements. So they want to be able to, in the solution, have the detailed audit of, okay, this device ID used by this user, they use this app and this provisioning profile, so that they have a recorded evidence to make sure that they're compliant. So at least within the US, most businesses actually operate with, even though it's an honorary licensing mechanism, they will only deploy the solution when they feel that they're fully compliant. And then when you go overseas, then that's a different thing. So even if you have stricter licensing, people always want to try to break into the licensing stuff. But at least in the US and the developed nations, it's all about stricter enforcement, even though it's an honorary licensing mechanism.
So given those constraints, when you say in a private store, you are still meaning that it's a private store for an enterprise, not a private store for your enterprise's consumers.
So the enterprise's consumers are also somewhat affiliated. Okay. So there is a difference. If you read all the Apple licensing documents, basically said you can only distribute these apps using your provisioning profile to your employees and your partners and stuff. Then the definition of a partner is actually very vague. Is my consumer a partner of my business? Obviously, yes. Without the consumers, I don't have a business, because they are probably the most important partners. So there is, different layered, set of interpretation. But the first and foremost thing that everybody is doing is they're first taking care of their own internal IT problem, and then they are basically now, Fidelity wants to distribute their own, Fidelity trading app, to their own devices and so on and so forth. But in all those, contexts, because that's a B2C scenario, they're actually going to the app store.
Yes.
Because that's available to not just my employees, right? Anybody could be using that stuff. In those cases, the private, so the public app store actually makes sense. And then there is also an intermediary. It's called iTunes Connect, Business Connect. That basically gives you more of a B2B kind of stuff. But there also, you don't have control. It still comes from the app store. Right? Any other questions?
So what is stopping enterprises to make their own app store like apps?
That's essentially, they are deploying it, but the problem is, all that Apple has given is, simply an SDK.
Correct.
Okay. So if you have IT resources, you can set up a web server, you can build all that stuff, and so on and so forth. But that's only the app store is one piece of it. The real thing is, once I distribute the apps, how do I ensure that those apps run securely in my own secure partition on the device? That's a bigger problem. So that's where Now all the solutions come with, App Store is actually, there is no real barrier to entry. It's an XML document and it's a web server, right? The real, thing is, and it's one solution. It's not like App Store is one solution and the security is a different one. Even with MDM, they have an App Store.
Any thoughts you mentioned on security, kind of a data in motion and data at rest? Any thoughts around authentication? Are we doomed to passwords forever?
Yeah, no. The first step of the security lifecycle is what we talked about is the hygiene. The first step is about the authentication and authorization. That's where the security really starts. So before the thing starts, you want to be able to authenticate against your Active Directory or any of the AAA system. And if you're talking about the financial stuff, yes, Active Directory is used to get your group membership and your authorization stuff, but they typically want you to authenticate with a two-factor token, or in fact, I work with customers where they were all the biometric kind of stuff. And in fact, the most important thing was there was some study done at Harvard where they thought that passwords are very easy to be compromised. So they used to actually enroll their users, and they used to show them about 6 faces, some arbitrary number of faces. And apparently our brain has a unique trait that if it sees a face, it will never forget. So instead of passwords, they will randomly show a combination of faces and a grid, and you just need to identify the face that you have previously seen before. It's called pass faces. And I've seen even more things where you carry a strobe and there is a light flashing and you put it there, it gives you a random token. The bunch of different types of authentication methods, and everybody is already deploying a bunch of those things. So it's basically Active Directory is the center because that's where you have group memberships, but your authentication can be added using any type of two-factor, biometric, or certificate, or any one of those things.
How do you view another technology, attestation, in your solution?
Sorry?
Device attestation.
Device attestation. You mean device? How do you guarantee the device identity?
The measurement of your software and hardware, send your measurement to the third party to make sure your device is authenticated, no virus, no hack.
So,
I know the project.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So number one is the first aspect of the BYOD is about assuming that you don't expect any kind of certain security posture. Okay? Assume that user can bring any type of devices, and you need to be able to create a secure partition around it. It's a shielded partition that basically does not interfere with whatever crap that you may have. Right? There used to be a market called endpoint security where you can actually come in and scan that. It basically meets certain profile criteria before you roll your secure partition. But at least the thing that we have seen right now is there is no real need for endpoint security other than that make sure that it's at least iOS 5 or greater type of devices and so on and so forth. Then the second question is how do you reliably identify the device, whether it has the device ID and so on and so forth. Until now, there is an API where you can get the Apple assigned device ID that you can use as part of your calls and so on and so forth. I think starting iOS 6 or something, they're planning to suppress that device ID API, where applications cannot, because apparently there were people that, sorry?
They've already done that. Apple doesn't
yeah,
do
but there are some companies that have actually, they can still get access to it. For example, if you're signed up as an MDM partner, you still have some of those things. But even if they don't have a thing, then the BYOD solutions, they themselves are assigning an ID for the secure partition, and then that's how they are actually maintaining a device attestation. Any follow-on questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
Thank you.
How does this security approach solve the Trojan horse problem with a rogue device that may have all well-managed and behaved applications as issued by the employer, but may have other applications that the user has put on himself which provide security risks, such as man-in-the-middle attacks or denial of service?
That's a question follow on your device ID, similar to it. If you have unique device, it does not mean you have a software that without infected, compromised. Does that? I think the similar question to just ask?
Yeah, the first and foremost thing is, the real BYOD, talks about is, you cannot really assume on certain security posture. The best case scenario is assume that the user may have all kinds of crap on their device, and then how do you overlay your own secure partition, right? The first and foremost thing is, like I said, even Apple themselves have actually created with their sandbox architecture some kind of shielding between the apps. It's not very easy right now for one app to go attack other app and so on and so forth, because there are some built-in stuff. But it's not enough, because there are certain provisions like one app can invoke others using extensions or application extensions. You can still compromise it. And of course, there could be vulnerabilities, and anybody can, security is such a, you can never say that I'm 100% stuff. So the goal that we are trying to create is you create a secure container or secure partition so that it's every data read that write that you do, it's encrypted with your own private key, and it's basically an additional sandboxing on top of the sandboxing that you have. So that way you can at least create more security and more shielding for the crap that the user has. That's the approach that we are trying to talk about. Now the Trojan effect that I'm not really getting clarity on the scenario that you're talking about is let me make sure if I understood the scenario. What you're saying is that somebody tries to come up with a sandbox, secure sandbox, which is actually not the real sandbox that the customer deployed, but your own Trojan sandbox. Is that the
Yes, the
scenario?
idea is, for example, a sandbox is merely an abstraction layer on top of the operating system, which it calls upon to provide services to the network. So you probably stick it into a VPN, and you lock in the transport so that anything that's done on a network outside that isn't accessible to the rest of the corporate network. So if everything's going through a VPN out of the sandbox, then you have security, but you can basically get in the middle of that by having an application that ties into the network services of the operating system and effectively captures all the information, or can act as a bot or a zombie to do denial of service attacks. There are a lot of different malicious ways.
Actually, number one, it's very, very, very difficult to inject third-party code into a running app on iOS. Okay. The way this wrapping actually works, it's not like you're putting some layer on top of the operating system that basically intercepts and all that stuff. At some level, the technology is all that stuff, but there is some unique techniques that different companies do, where what they have is they intercept every call. Like file system call, gesture call, and network call, and so on and so forth, so that you could create your own wrapping service. And that only can be that layer has to be assigned by the same provisioning profile and so on and so forth. If it's some foreign thing without the right provisioning file and signing stuff, it cannot inject itself. So that is the protection mechanism that, sorry.
Well, you're assuming all the apps are coming out of a secure source like the App Store.
The private app store. Yeah, that's where I said, when you looked at when you looked at the app wrapping approaches, I made this comment here. Some do not work with App Store or native apps.
Right.
In other words, if it comes from a private app store, you can actually do a bunch of stuff. But we are trying to create a shielding for the apps that are already there, or worse yet, the built-in mail. Then it actually is a much difficult problem.
Right.
And that's something that I don't think I can quite divulge on how to do it, but there are probably one or two companies that can actually do that. So that's about it. Thank you so much for your comments. And